Hi, I'm Pam Thompson. I was looking for a short story to read this time and came across an intriguing title. So I looked up the author and found she was intriguing as well. Laura Howe Richards was born in Boston in 1850. She was the daughter of Dr. Samuel Howe, who was an abolitionist and the founder of Perkins Institute and Massachusetts School for the Blind. Her mother was also Julia Ward Howe, who wrote the words to Battle Hymn of the Republic. Now, Laura was a prolific writer, and in 1917 she won a Pulitzer Prize for her biography of her mother. She and her husband raised their children in Gardner, Maine. There is an elementary school in Gardner named for her. Laura also loved Maine, but she loved winter even more. This story, the girls in this story are named for the states where they came from. Maine to the Rescue by Laura Richards. Oh dear, it's snowing. Hurrah, hurrah, it's snowing. Massachusetts looked up from her algebra. She was head of the school. She was rosy and placid as the apple she was generally eating when not in class. Apples and algebra were the things she cared most about in school life. Whence comes these varying cries? She said, taking her feet off the fender and trying to be interested, though her thoughts went on with A 1/6 B equals, etc. Oh, Virginia's grumbling because it's snowing, and Maine is feeling happy over it. That's all, said Rhode Island, the smallest girl in Miss Whalen's school. Poor Virginia, it's rather hard on you to have snow in March when you have just gotten your spring box of clothes from home. It's atrocious, said Virginia, a tall, graceful, languishing girl. How could they send me to such a place where it is winter all the spring? Why, at home the violets are in blossom, the trees are coming out, the birds are singing. And at home, broke in Maine, who was a tall girl too, but lithe and breezy as a young willow with flyaway hair and dancing brown eyes. At home, all is winter, white, beautiful, glorious winter, with ice 2 and 3 feet thick on the rivers, and great fields and fields of snow, all sparkling in the sun, and the sky a vast sapphire overhead without a speck. Oh, the glory of it, the splendor of it. And here is neither fish, flesh, fowl, nor good red herring, a wretched and makeshift season, which they call winter because they don't know what else to call it. Come, come, said old New York, who was 17 years old and had her own ideas of dignity. Let us alone, you two outsiders. We are neither Eskimos or Hindus, it is true. But the Empire State should not change climates with either of you. No, indeed, chimed in young New York, who always followed her leader in everything from opinion down to hair ribbons. No, indeed, repeated Virginia with a languid scorn, because you couldn't get anyone to change with you, my dear. Young New York reddened. You are so disagreeable, Virginia, she said. I am glad I don't have to live with you all the year round. Personal remarks, said Massachusetts, looking up calmly. 1 cent, young New York, for the missionary fund. Thank you. Let me give you each a half an apple and you'll feel better. She solemnly divided a large red apple and gave the halves to the two scowling girls, who took them, laughing in spite of themselves, and went their separate ways. "Why don't you let them have it out, Massachusetts?" said Maine, laughing. "You never let anyone have a good row." "Slang," said Massachusetts, looking up again. 1 cent for the missionary fund. "You will clothe the heathens at this rate, Maine. That is the 4th cent today." "Row isn't slang," protested Maine, feeling, however, for her pocketbook. "Vulgar colloquial," returned Massachusetts quietly. "And perhaps you would go away now, Maine, or else be quiet. Have you learned—" "No, I haven't," said Maine. "I will do it very soon, dear Saint Apple. I must look at the snow a little more." Maine went dancing off to her room, where she threw the window open and looked out with delight. The girl caught up a double handful and tossed it about, laughing for pure pleasure. Then she leaned out to feel the beating of the flakes on her face. "Really quite a respectable little snowstorm," she said, nodding approval at the whirling white drift. "Go on, and you will be worthwhile, my dear." She went singing to her algebra, which she could not have done if it had not been snowing. The snow went on increasing from hour to hour. By noon, the wind began to rise. Before night, it was blowing a furious gale. Furious blasts clutched at the windows and rattled them like castanets. The wind howled and shrieked and moaned till it seemed as if the air were filled with angry demons fighting to possess the square white house. Many of the pupils of Miss Whalen's school came to the tea table with disturbed faces. But Massachusetts was calm as usual, and Maine was jubilant. "Isn't it a glorious storm?" she cried exultingly. "I didn't know there could be such a storm in this part of the country, Miss Whalen. Will you give me some milk, please?" "There is no milk, my dear," said Miss Whalen, who looked rather troubled. "The milkman has not come, probably will not come tonight. There has never been such a storm here in my lifetime," she added. "Do you have such storms at home, my dear?" "Oh, yes, indeed," Maine said cheerfully. "I don't know that we often have so much wind as this, but the snow is nothing out of the way. Why, on Palm Sunday last year, our milkman dug through a drift 20 feet deep to get at his cows. He was the only milkman who ventured out, and he took me and the minister's wife to church in his little red pung. We were the only women in church, I remember. Miss Betsy Follansby, who had not missed going to church in 15 years, started out on foot after climbing out of her bedroom window to the shed roof and sliding down. All her doors were blocked and she lived alone, so there was no one to dig her out. But she got stuck in a drift about halfway and had to stay there till one of the neighbors came by and pulled her out." All the girls laughed at this, and even Miss Whalen smiled. But suddenly she looked grave again. "Hark," she said, and listened. "Did you not hear something?" "We hear Boreas and Astor, Urus and Zephyrus," answered old New York, "nothing else." At that moment there was a lull in the screeching of the wind. All listened intently, and a faint sound was heard from without, which was not that of the blast. "A child," said Massachusetts, rising quickly. "It is a child's voice. I will go, Miss Whalen." "I cannot permit it, Alice," cried Miss Whalen, in great distress. "I cannot allow you to think of it. You are just recovering from a severe cold, and I am responsible to your parents. What shall we do? It certainly sounds like a child crying out in the pitiless storm. Of course, it may be a cat." Maine had gone to the window at the first alarm and now turned with shining eyes. "It is a child," she said quietly. "I have no cold, Miss Wayland. I am going, of course." Passing by Massachusetts, who had started out of her usual calm and stood in some perplexity, she whispered, "If it were freezing, it wouldn't cry. I shall be in time. Get a ball of stout twine." She disappeared. In 3 minutes she returned, dressed in her blanket coat reaching halfway below her knees, scarlet leggings, and gaily wrought moccasins. On her head, a fur cap with a band of sea otter fur projecting over her eyes. In her hand she held a pair of snowshoes. She had no opportunity to wear her snowshoeing suit all winter, and she was quite delighted. "My child," said Miss Whalen faintly, "how can I let you go? My duty is to your parents. What are those strange things, and what are you going to make of them?" By the way of an answer, Maine slipped her feet into the snowshoes and, with Massachusetts' aid, quickly fastened the thongs. "The twine," she said. "Yes, that will do, plenty of it. Tie it to the door handle, square knot. So, I'm all right, dear. Don't worry." Like a flash, the girl was gone out into the howling night. Miss Whalen wrung her hands and wept, and most of the girls wept with her. Virginia, who was curled up in the corner, really sick with fright, beckoned to Massachusetts. "Is there any chance of her coming back alive?" she asked in a whisper. "I wish I had made up with her. But we may all die in this awful storm." "Nonsense," said Massachusetts. "Try to have a little sense, Virginia. Maine is all right and can take care of herself. And as for whimpering at the wind when you have a good roof over your head, it's too absurd." For the first time since she came to school, Massachusetts forgot the study hour, as did everyone else. And in spite of her brave effort at cheerful conversation, it was a sad and anxious group that sat about the fire in the pleasant parlor. Maine went out quickly and closed the door behind her. Then she stood still a moment, listening for the direction of the cry. She did not hear it at first, but presently it broke out. A piteous little wail, sounding louder now in the open air. The girl bent her head to listen. Where was the child? The voice came from the right, surely. She would make her way down the road, and then she could tell better. Grasping the ball of twine firmly, she stepped forward, planting the broad snowshoes lightly on the soft, dry snow. As she turned the corner of the house, an icy blast caught her as if by furious hands, shook her like a leaf, and flung her roughly against the wall. Her forehead struck the corner, and for a moment she was stunned. But the blood trickling down her face quickly brought her to herself. She set her teeth, folded her arms tightly, and stooping forward, measured her strength once more with that of the gale. This time it seemed as if she were cleaving a wall of ice which opened only to close behind her. On she struggled, unrolling her twine as she went. The child's cry sounded louder, and she took fresh heart. Pausing, she clapped her hand to her mouth repeatedly, uttering a shrill, long cry. It was the Indian whoop which her father had taught her in the woodland rambles at home. The childish wail stopped. She repeated the cry louder and longer, then shouted at the top of her lungs, "Hold on! Help is coming!" Again and again the wind buffeted her and forced her backwards a step or two, but she lowered her head and wrapped her arms more tightly about her body and plodded on. Once she fell, stumbling over a stump. Twice she ran against a tree, for the dark whiteness had absolute blinding, and she saw nothing, felt nothing but snow. At last her snowshoes struck something hard. She stretched out her hand. It was a stone wall. And now, as she crept along beside it, the child's wail broke out again, close at hand. "Mother! Oh, mother, mother!" The girl's heart beat fast. "Where are you?" she cried. At the same moment she stumbled against something soft. A mound of snow, was it? No, for it moved. It moved and cried, and little hands clutched at her dress. She saw nothing, but it put her hands down and touched a cold little face. She dragged the child out of the snow, which had almost covered it, and set it on its feet. "Who are you?" she asked, putting her face down close, while by vigorous patting and rubbing she tried to give life to the benumbed, cowering little figure which staggered along helplessly, clutching her with half-frozen fingers. "Benny Withers," sobbed the child. "Mother sent me for the clothes, but I can't get 'em." "Benny Withers!" cried Maine. "Why, you live close by. Why don't you go home, child?" "I can't," cried the boy. "I can't see nothing. I tried to get to the school, and I tried to get home, and I can't get nowhere except against this wall. Let me stay here now. I want to rest me a little." He would have sunk down again, but Maine caught him up in her strong young arms. "Here, climb up on my back, Benny," she said cheerfully. "Hold tight around my neck, and you shall rest while I take you home. So, that's a brave boy. Upsy now. There you are. Put your head on my shoulder close and hold on." Ah, how Maine blessed the heavy little brother at home, who would ride on his sister's back long after Mamma had told him he was too big. How she blessed the carryings up and down the stairs, the horsey rides, through the garden and down the lane, which had made her shoulders strong. Benny Withers was 8 years old, but he was small and slender and no heavier than 6-year-old Philip. No need of telling the child to hold on. Once he was up out of the cruel snow bed, he clung desperately around the girl's neck and pressed his head close against the woolen stuff. Maine pulled her ball of twine from her pocket. Fortunately, it was a large one, and the twine, though strong, was fine, so that there seemed to be no end to it. And once more, lowering her head, she set her teeth, moved forward, keeping close to the wall in the direction of Mrs. Withers' cottage. For a while she saw nothing. When she looked up under the fringe of the otter fur, which, long and soft, kept the snow from blinding her, nothing but white, whirling drift which beat with icy, stinging blows to her face. But at last her eyes caught a faint glimmer of light, and presently a brighter gleam showed her Mrs. Withers' gray cottage, now white like the rest of the world. Bursting open the cottage door, she almost threw the child into the mother's arms. The woman, who had been weeping wildly, could hardly believe her eyes. She caught the little boy and smothered him with kisses, chafing his cold hands and crying over him. "I didn't know," she said. "I didn't know till he was gone. I told him at noon he was to go, but never thinking 'twould be like this. I was sure he was lost and dead, but I couldn't leave my sick baby. Bless you, whoever you are, man or woman. But stay, get warm and rest ye. You're never going out in this awful storm." But Maine was gone. In Miss Whalen's parlor, the suspense was fast becoming unendurable. They had heard Maine's Indian whoop, and some of them, Miss Whalen herself among the number, thought it was a cry of distress. But Massachusetts rightly interpreted the call and assured them it was a call of encouragement to the bewildered child. Then came silence within the house, and a prolonged clamor, a sort of witches' chorus, with wailing and shrieking without. Once a heavy branch was torn from one of the great elms and came thundering down on the roof. This proved the finishing touch for poor Virginia. She went into violent hysterics and was carried off to bed by Miss Whalen and old New York. Massachusetts presently ventured to explore a little. She hastened through the hall to the front door, opened it a few inches, and put her hand out on the twine which was fastened to the handle. What was her horror to find that it had hung loose, swinging idly in the wind. Sick at heart, she shut the door, pressing her hands over her eyes, and tried to think. Maine must be lost in the howling storm. She must find her. But where and how? Oh, if Miss Wayland had only let her go first. She was older, would not have mattered so much. But now, quick, she would wrap herself warmly and slip out without anyone knowing. The girl was turning to fly up the stairs when suddenly something fell heavily against the door outside. There was a fumbling for the handle. The next moment it flew open, and something white stumbled into the hall, shut the door, and sat down heavily on the floor. "Personal rudeness," gasped Maine, struggling for breath. "You shut the door in my face. 1 cent for the missionary fund." The great storm was over. The sun came up and looked down on a strange white world. No fences, no walls, only a smooth ridge where one of these had been. Trees, which the day before had been quite tall, now looked like dwarfs spreading their broad arms not far from the snow carpet beneath them. Road there was none. All was smooth, save where some huge drift knotted its crest like a billow curling for its downward rush. Maine, spite of her scarred face, which showed as many patches as that of a court lady in King George's times, was jubilant. Tired? Not a bit. A little stiff, just enough to need limbering out, as they said at home. "There is no butter," she announced at breakfast. "There is no milk, no meat for dinner. Therefore, I go a snowshoeing. Dear Miss Wayland, let me go. I have learned my algebra, and I shall discover unknown quantities at every step, which will be just as instructive." Miss Wayland could refuse nothing to the heroine of last night's adventure. Behold Maine, therefore, triumphant, sullying forth, clad once more in her blanket suit and dragging her sled behind her. There was no struggling now, no hand-to-hand wrestling with storm demons. The sun laughed from a sky as blue and deep as her own sky of Maine, and the girl laughed with him as she walked along, the powdery snow flying in a cloud from her snowshoes at every step. Such a sight had never been seen in Mentor Village before. The people came running to their upper windows, their lower ones were for the most part blocked by snow, and stared with all their eyes at the strange apparition. In the street, life was beginning to stir. People had found, somewhat to their own surprise, that they were alive and well after the blizzard. And knots of men were clustered here and there, discussing the storm, while some were already at work tunneling through drifts. Mr. Perkins, the butcher, had just got his door open, and with great amusement and astonishment when Maine hailed him from atop of great drift and demanded a quarter of mutton and some soup meat. Yes, miss," he stammered, open-mouthed with astonishment. I've got the meat, but I wasn't, my team isn't out this morning. I don't know about sending it." "I have a team here," said Maine quietly, pulling her sled alongside. "Give me the mutton, Mr. Perkins. You may charge it to Miss Wayland, please, and I will take it home." The butterman and the grocer were visited in the same way, and Maine, rather embarrassed by the concentrated observation of the whole village, turned to pull her laden sled back, when suddenly a window was thrown open and a voice exclaimed, "Young woman, I will give you $10 for the use of those snowshoes for an hour." Maine looked up in amazement and laughed merrily when she saw the well-known countenance of the village doctor. "What? You, my dear young lady!" cried the good man. "This is Maine to the rescue, indeed. I might have known it was you. But I repeat my offer. Make it anything you please, only let me have the snowshoes. I cannot get a horse out, and I have 2 patients dangerously ill. What is your price for the magic shoes?" "My price, doctor," repeated Maine, looking up with dancing eyes. "My price is 1 cent for the missionary fund. The snowshoes are yours, and I will get home somehow with my sled and the mutton." So she did, and Dr. Fowler made his calls for the snowshoes and saved a life and brought cheer and comfort to many. But it was $10, not 1 cent, which he gave to the missionary fund.